Well, hello, Marc and Olivia. It's really good to see you. And thank you for coming on the show, Entrepreneurs, Business, and Finance, our first musicians on the show. Hello.
Hi, good to
Hi.
see you.
Hi, thank you very much for having us on your program.
So, a little bit about Marc and Olivia, because I have had a lot of good friends on the show, but Marc and I became friends when we were about 10, soccer buddies in grade school. And I met Olivia before she married Marc, and when they were dating, and they met my wife, now Olga, before we were married. So this has been a long-term friendship as we start to get older, very long-term friendship. And it's really neat to have you on the show. And while you may not readily think of having musicians on the show as a business, they have their own business. You all have your own business because you have a studio where you teach students, and then you have a performing career. And we'll get more into that, but you've been taught at and taught with teachers from some of the most widely recognized institutions in the world. One teacher taught Isaac Perlman and people like that, was a teacher at Juilliard. You have PhDs, you've been professor yourselves. I couldn't keep track of it, but I think you performed in Italy, Japan, Canada, around the US, England, other European cities, and DC. I know at least Marc at the Kennedy Center, maybe both of you as well. And so really accomplished musicians. And I think that your music has always been first, but you do have that business component because this is how you're making a living as well. So why don't you start out, if you would, by telling us what it's like to be a professional musician and what it's like to teach students and how your what your career looks like right now.
Well, it is a wonderful thing to work at what you enjoy the most. So we're really lucky to be able to do that and to set our own schedules. That's a great thing. And the other thing that we particularly enjoy, well, I do anyway, is working together. If you're a musician and you're a soloist, you're traveling alone, you're in hotel rooms, it's a lonely business. But for us, because we always get to do everything together, it's been just kind of a special thing. And that's always meant a lot to me. And even our teaching work, we used to teach at a university, now we teach at home. We have our own business, teaching at separate studios in our house, and that's great to have that freedom and all the different ages of the students that we have, 8 years old through 75-year-olds. So all of that keeps it very interesting for us.
Just because I know Marc, a little point, you said you'd like to work together because it's more lonely, you yourself. Well, he does too, because he's told me that, in case he didn't tell you
Well,
that.
I better say yes, Henry. Otherwise, our franchise is going to run into some trouble here. So yes, of course I do.
And talk about teaching at some schools, because I know you also frequently teach at schools or campuses or festivals in the summer, because that's when a lot of kids are off. And I know that's been a regular thing in Marc, at least. You probably did as well. Olivia went to some of those camps and schools in the summer when he was learning. And now you're back as a professor, teacher, PhDs also in music. What's that like?
Well, that's a lot of fun. Going to a summer festival, although you're still making music, playing music, teaching, you're doing it in a very different setting, often in beautiful settings or exotic settings. So like you said, we've been in Italy, we've been in many different places in Europe doing that. And you're also teaching students, often in a different format. Whereas at home, you're usually teaching them private lessons, one-on-one. In the summer festival format, we're teaching them in master classes. Maybe there's a lot of students watching us teach, or we're teaching them in groups with chamber music, string quartets, things like that. We also get together with other faculty and get to perform music. So we'll rehearse with other faculty and prepare concerts, which is a lot of fun because we get to meet faculty. And after the rehearsals and after concerts, there's a lot of partying going on too. So that's a lot of fun. So that kind of takes us out of our usual daily routine. So yeah, we enjoy that.
And my dad used to joke about my mom because she became a realtor later in life, and they had an unlisted phone number back, but these were when people had landlines and not the cell phones. And uh, he used to joke, she's the only realtor I know that had an unlisted phone number because she didn't market herself. It was people she knew and friends that she genuinely wanted to help. She helped you find your house, as an example. And one of the things that I'm aware of and have noticed, because in the world of business, there's so many people and so many musicians that spend an awful lot of their time marketing and promoting themselves. And I know you have surely meet people, and I'm sure you send out some notices and things, but you guys are not a marketing machine, you're a musician machine. It seems to me that most of the concerts and things that, not that you didn't open the doors and welcome it, respond to calls, but kind of came to you because you're always working hard at performing and increasing your level of musicality and your love and passion for classical music.
It's true. I mean, most of our concerts are repeat bookings. That is because I was looking over the concerts we've been doing the last 20 years. They are repeat bookings, but it still is, I found, really important to retain a connection with the conductors or the presenters that we work with. So I still will write to them all probably twice a year, every fall, every spring. I'll send out a note to everybody, and then a bunch of other people who have never booked us, but I'm hoping maybe they will. And I do that for several hundred people and keep up that connection, because often it can be maybe 5 years between concerts, but I want to make sure that we still have a friendship going. And when we first started this, we both thought this is just miserable. We have to tell people how great we are all the time, and we really don't want to do that. But actually,
She's much better at doing that than I am.
Well, I don't do that though. I don't say, oh, you really need to book us because of this, that, and the other. I just say, this is what we do. Maybe it'll interest you. And then I found you kind of make a friendship with that person, and they'll even talk to you about, oh, I didn't call back because I've had some plumbing problems. And then the next time I call them, I'll say, how did that work out with your new bathroom or your grandchild or whatever? And then there's almost a friendship there, which I always enjoy.
She's a natural at that. I will say, Henry, that there was a point where we did have to get the ball rolling. And so in the early phase of our professional career, there was a lot more networking. I mean, we still network now, but I guess there was more effort in doing it. So there was a phase of our life where we went to a lot of conferences.
Yeah.
And tried to make sure that we got showcased so we could perform on those conferences. And we went all over the country. Sometimes we got a booth, we got a place where we could sell our CD or promote our CD and things like that. So there was a period where, and we did enter competitions. So we were prize winners in some competitions. So and that's kind of a natural phase when you're in your 20s, very early 30s. So we went through all that, but then as you get more established, and we're, as you said, we're not promotion machined. It's not. This is not the only thing we want to do with our lives. Is constantly market and constantly get as many concerts as we possibly can. We enjoy what we're doing. We're enjoying our life, and so once we've got the ball rolling, then as Olivia said, then it's about keeping those relationships, forming new relationships, and we've been able to do that.
Yeah, been very lucky.
It's amazing to me, just the fact that it's so worldly. I mean, from Japan's, I guess, halfway around the world. I mean, Japan, Europe. I read, I didn't realize you've been Mallorca. That's some place I like to go some point. And they tend to be a lot of very, as you say, very nice, beautiful places. They're not having these festivals in the rough part of town, so to speak. But they're choosing nice places, and with a lot of interesting people, and from all over the world. And I know, Mark, you had a couple, more than a couple, but a few Heinrich Schering and classical virtuosos that taught you for a while on one-on-one, and were really, and I'm sure Olivia had those as well. I just knew Mark before I knew Olivia, when he was a teenager and in college. And I mean, one time you were in Monaco, wasn't that where you were staying with?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He taught there.
And,
He had a flat there, so that was one of his several residences. So I would go in the summer times there and study with him.
and for those of you that don't know, he's, there's all these ratings, it's like an athlete or something, but he's certainly up there in one of the great virtuosos in the violin world, for those that are in the know. And, Isaac Perlman's going to be more famous in this country, but he was a bit of a marketer. And it's interesting because when you talk about marketing, when I think about marketing in business, it's like a marketing team, it's like an assistant, like a website, it's like constant. You're really about talking, keeping up relationships and meeting people that you like and staying in touch with people you like, and letting them know you're there and that you like to perform if the opportunity arises. And that reaching out, I recall now back, was a bit of a leap because you weren't really necessarily ready to go market yourself, but you realized you needed to in the
That's
very
right.
beginning. Yeah.
We weren't natural at it. And in fact, I'm a little bit older than Olivia. So I kind of, at the very start, I kind of started getting it going. I knew a little bit more about it and, kind of got our CD going and started making calls. But, I quickly found out that I was pretty bad at it because, like you said, I'm just crap at talking about myself and what we've done. And also I'd make a call to a presenter or I'd have my lists of presenters and I'd start making calls. And then my natural disorganization came up because then I'd call somebody and then they'd say, you just called me 5 minutes ago. Don't call me again. And that's the end of that relationship. So Olivia kind of took over a lot of that part of it, and she's way, way better than I am. So,
True.
yeah. So that's how. So we each have our different things that we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and to switch back to music here, I know that Mark, you play piano also growing up. I know that you took lessons and now have taught conducting. I know Olivia, you play viola and violin. Talk a little bit about music and what you like to do, what you want to do there, what interests you on the performing side.
Well, we're classical musicians, so that's our primary interest, but we do play other styles. We do a little bit of Latin music and some Eastern European folk and jazz styles, but they're all still rooted in classical. So, nowadays there's a lot of crossover going on, and we toyed with that for a while, but in the end, you want to do what you do best. So
Yeah, that's right. There's some classical musicians who will start playing jazz and other stuff. And the thing is that if you want to do it well, you really need to be steeped in it. And I also know some classical musicians who get up there and try to, play a jazz or rock or bluegrass, and they think they're cool, but they really do not look very cool at all doing it. And I'm petrified of not looking cool up there. So
yeah, so we do a lot of stuff that isn't strictly classical. We'll do fun stuff, and we also, in our concerts, we will talk between every piece that we play, and we keep that very light and informal, talk to people about the music, but we joke around a little bit. So that's important too, because classical concerts can be very boring if all you're hearing is long pieces that are 25 minutes long and that's it. So we make sure
I really like that about your concerts because I mean, my parents loved classical music. They took us to the symphony when I was growing up and the opera, but I'm not that knowledgeable, maybe compared to some people, but certainly not compared to classical musicians. So when you talk about it, it makes it more interesting. You know what the piece is about, who wrote it, why, how you chose it, and that's really a nice part. And then the rapport between you, as you said. It's funny, I didn't necessarily, until you brought it up now, I kind of didn't think of that. Please.
that's right. And so we tried not to, as Olivia said, we talk about our music, but we also usually don't fill our programs with long pieces that last forever.
Yeah.
So we often include shorter ones and with a lot of variety.
And I do know that you have also both played together and separately some of the most difficult, longest concertos in the world. All the famous names of Bach and Brahms and et cetera, that are really hard and that most people who are musicians wouldn't even be able to play, much less play at a very high level. And so I know you enjoy that. So there have been instances where you've gone and played 30, 45 minutes, straight
Yes.
without stopping. It's at the appropriate venue, though. It's maybe where someone goes to a symphony, that's what they're expecting.
Right.
Of
And
course.
also it will be, I mean, I think you're talking about when we play concertos with orchestra, and we do that a lot. And that's an unusual thing to have a duo that does that. There isn't an endless number of double concertos, as they're called, but we do that. We're doing one actually in just a few weeks' time, a couple of them with an orchestra, and that's really fun and a whole other sort of kettle of fish, really, because if you're a soloist and you're playing a concerto with an orchestra, you prepare your part and then you get to the rehearsals and you rehearse with the orchestra and you play. But we have to learn our parts separately, but then we have to play them together, work on them together, and then join the orchestra and combine with them, and it all has to fit together, which is much more complicated, but it's also very fun and kind of a good challenge. So we enjoy that.
We have also stood up and played solo concertos individually as well. So we do also do that from time to time as well. A few years ago, actually, a conductor asked us to play two separate viola concertos. And so Olivia stood up and played the Telemann Viola Concerto, and I played the Bruch Romance, which is also a lovely viola concerto. And a few years ago, I think it was right before the pandemic, an orchestra in Japan invited me to play the Vivaldi Four Seasons. So I went over and I did that. And of course, it's a pretty substantial piece.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've heard consistently over time, all these years, is you're busy because you have two big new concertos you need to learn for these two new performances on top of the students and the scheduled time at your teaching camp and this, that, and the other. So you're learning a lot of new pieces, or you're relearning them after 15 years when you last played them. That's not an easy thing to do, I would think, no matter how proficient you are or how talented.
No, you have to do the work all over again, basically. We just, last year we had a whole bunch of double concertos and we thought, oh, we've played this before, it'll be fine. But it was like learning them from scratch. And that takes, a good few months to really get them into the shape that you want them to be.
And that's one of the things that people may not realize is, yes, you're teaching and you're performing, but you're also continually practicing and learning, continuous learning. But a lot of, I mean, I think you enjoy the work, but maybe don't call it work, but a lot of effort and time practicing and learning pieces. It's a lot of discipline. You don't just wake up and gonna go play these concerts because I'm a musician for 40 years. Got to continue.
Yeah, every day. You have to practice pretty much every day.
Yeah, for sure. And
for several hours.
And for instance, there's a piece we're playing the end of October, and it's a concerto. It's a very difficult one that we hadn't played in about 15 years. And we started working on it in March. And, and we're still working on it. And in a year that we also kind of, there's a kind of calendar in our heads where we're doing this, we have X number of concerts with different kinds of repertoire. And we have to manage that. I think one of the most difficult things about preparing a piece to perform is that you're not ready until you're ready. And often you can feel and when it's ready for performance. But even after all these years that we've done this, can never say exactly when that point is. And sometimes you can estimate it within a few weeks. But on occasion, there have been times where something has taken, has taken months longer than I thought to get ready. It was like almost ready, and then we kept pushing, but it just wasn't there. And that can be disconcerting, and sometimes it can be stressful if you have other things you're preparing for, and they're all lined up, and just one thing that happens like that can kind of set off a chain where you're behind in a lot of other things that you're preparing. So yes, there actually is a lot of organization involved in preparing these.
Yeah, because we can plan out the year beautifully, and then some conductor will phone with a really nice offer that we can't say no to. So we stick in that extra concert, and suddenly everything else is messed up by that because we've got to add a whole load of extra practice time that we weren't calculating on. So that's always, you want to do the thing, but it's like that with every business. I'm sure something else comes along and throws you for a loop a bit. So yeah.
And you also have a diversity of things you play because you're very interested in trying new things. So you play with quartets sometimes. There's YouTube videos of you with quartets. You must have to practice on your own and with them, not just the two of you, but with the four of you at that point.
Yeah, there's that. And then you want to plan, well, I don't want to have to play something that I don't know at all with this group because it's going to require a lot of rehearsal that I'm not going to have time for in those particular months. So you have to but then the presenter has their own idea of what they want. So you have to be a little clever in offering something that they think they want, but in fact, it's what you want. You just worded it in such a way that they don't realize that there's a difference there. So,
well, let's talk about your students and the joy, and because I hear a lot of happy stories when we get together about teaching the students, and I know you have a love for that. And like anything, like practice or students, I'm sure there's challenges every once in a while, or maybe more periodically than that. But how about some fun things with the students? And it's got to be rewarding to have them want to come see you and watch them improve. And
Yeah, it's great. I think what I especially like, as I was saying before, teaching at home is the wide range of ages and different kids. It's, it's fun teaching 8-year-olds, but it's also really fun teaching people who've decided to learn the violin at retirement. And so you run into a whole different set of problems to deal with. Their hands work differently, their brains work differently, and that is great. It's just like solving puzzles every day. And then you also have the teenagers in the middle, and they might have their sort of emotional things that come up a little bit, because it is a one-on-one lesson. So that kind of stuff is going to come out when you're just dealing with a child and you're a little bit of a mentor for them. So all of that can be very interesting. You're just dealing with individual people, and that's always fascinating.
Yeah, I guess I'll add to that to say that, you think of teaching as one particular thing. You're teaching music, in our case, we're violin and viola professors, teachers, and we know how to do this. And people might think, well, you have a certain method of doing it, and of course we do. Some people will say, oh, do you teach Suzuki method, or do you teach this or that? But the interesting thing is that every single lesson with each different person is completely different. It's a completely different lesson because of the character of that person. People have different characters. They have different ways that they learn. Some people learn better when you explain things in words. Other people don't learn that well that way. They're more intuitive or more instinctive. If you're dealing with kids, some kids will, you could give them a bunch of exercises and they're happy to do that. Other kids get impatient with that and they'll quit if you give them too many etudes. So you might have to give them a piece that sounds cool, but maybe sneak in a special kind of piece that has a lot of technique or something that gets them doing what they need to be doing, but they don't really realize that it's also, there's a lot of technical exercises involved. And so yeah, it really is. And you have to learn to be flexible. I'm always for myself, I'm always kind of butting up against that, actually, because I try to really instill very, very solid foundations with students. But I find that sometimes, I could get a little too pedantic. And so with some kids, it's just certain things aren't going to take, and I have to say, okay, well, I'm just going to bide my time, wait a year, and then maybe I'll try that again when they're ready to buckle down on that thing, and then we'll do something else that's more fun, or something like that.
Yeah,
that's good.
I think that for me, my goal now that I'm not teaching at a university is that the kids go on playing their whole lives, and that it's something they're probably going to have stressful jobs, and I want music to be something that will be relaxing for them. So when I'm teaching a lesson, I'm thinking, okay, maybe they're not ready, as Marc said, to perfect this particular technique, but if I can get them playing and interested in improving gradually until they get to college, then they have that foundation. It'll always be there for them. And it's been interesting that, especially during the pandemic, some previous students that had graduated, maybe 10 years ago, reached out and said, I really want to have lessons again online now that that's an option, because they live somewhere else. And I have maybe 3 students who I used to teach as kids, and now they're 28 years old, and they're playing again and taking lessons. And that's just wonderful, because they weren't necessarily the ones who loved it when they were children, but it stayed with them. So
I could also just differentiate the period where we were college professors to now teaching, having our own private studio. So of course, we taught then too, and we enjoyed it. There was a lot of great things then. I would say one of the, and I guess in that situation, when we were professors, we were not, sole proprietors. We were not business people in that sense. We were employed. One of the nice things going over and having our own studio is when we were at the university, there was a lot of things we would have to do that did not involve teaching. And, some people might like that. You had to be maybe on the music stand and chair committee, and sit down and have committees. I'm kind of making a little light of that. I don't think there's a music stand committee, but you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of self-regulation in universities, and a lot of and then, sometimes I might get an email from someone in administration saying, oh, this person is well connected, and we really want them as a student, and we think that I don't know, we think that their parents might contribute to the fund of the university. There's a lot of other stuff besides teaching that's going on in university. And as teaching, having our own private studio, there's nothing but pure teaching. We don't have to have other considerations, just the students' progress. If they like what we're teaching them, then they'll stay. If they don't like what they're getting, then they'll leave. Same thing for us. If we think the student is making good progress and if it's a good fit, then we keep them. If we think that they're not practicing or they don't like what they're doing or other issues, then we can also say, I think you should move on, find another teacher. So either one of us is free to stay or free to leave. And so I think that it's a very pure teaching arrangement in that sense.
Well, and I remember when you all started your studio, that takes some guts too. A lot of people don't make that step, and maybe they shouldn't. It's not right for them because you weren't sure how it was going to turn out. You got to get those students, and you got to get those concerts, and you don't have the regular big, strong university putting the automatic deposit into your account every 2 weeks. And as I recall, it really came together pretty quickly. You were well known enough, and the students liked you enough that you got a lot of students quicker than you thought, and you're pretty much filled up.
Yeah, I think the time period that we opened the studio also happened to be just a good one, and people were ready to take lessons. If we started it a few years later, it might have been a little bit different, but we were lucky at that time. And also Marc coming from this area helped because a lot of the orchestra teachers knew him, and we already had done a lot of playing in this area. So all of that, I think, helped a great deal. And then there's word of mouth, of course.
That's right. So when we were teaching, of course, part of our duties for teaching was recruiting students. And so we were in touch with most of the music teachers,
music shops,
orchestra teachers in public schools in the Northern Virginia area. We would go visit them regularly and be recruiting for the university. So when we decided to open up our own studio, we already knew a lot of people. So of course, it was still an unknown because we didn't know how many people would bite. You never know that until they do. But we certainly did have a strategy going in and a way of making connections and getting people to be interested in studying with us. So that starts with the recommendation, of course, and then you get a couple of students going, and then there's a lot of word of mouth after that.
Well, I know, Olivia, you came here originally on a Fulbright scholarship. Because I don't actually know much about this, as I feel like I should. And how did you first start in music? And did you always think you wanted to be a musician? And what led to your Fulbright scholarship? And
Well, music was in the family. My mother's a musician, and I'm not exactly sure how I started, but I do remember that when I was about 4, I went to a concert that Itzhak Perlman was playing, and I really loved that. And I think that led me to play the violin, but it could just as well be that my mum put a violin in my hand. I was so young, I really can't remember, but it was always part of my life and always kind of somehow decided that this was what I was going to do. There was never a moment where I made that decision. So I went to the Royal Academy of Music as a child from the age of 7 and went to their Saturday program. And then I went to the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester, which is one of the music colleges in England. There's 4 music colleges, and this was one of them, studied with Russian teachers. And then I think I saw an advert about Fulbright on the wall, and I thought, well, I'll apply for that. Didn't really know what it was, and didn't realize that you have to do an essay. It's a really important essay in order to get a Fulbright, and then you have an interview. And I didn't even know that people take classes to prepare for this essay, and it's a big deal. And it's probably just as well that I didn't know that, because I just wrote the essay without thinking too hard about it and sent it in and got accepted. I think if I had known how important it was, I might not have written an essay that was so natural. And I think that was what helped. And then you go for this interview, and they want to know about how it's a leadership scholarship. A Fulbright is always about leadership, even though it's specifically for music or some other things. So then you have a long interview where you're talking about, how you think you can be a leader in that field. No idea. what I said, actually. But yeah, so that led me to study in America, because then I thought, when you're a British Fulbrighter, you have to study in the States. If you're an American Fulbrighter, you can study anywhere because it's an American program. So then I had to figure out where I was going to study, because I didn't have any of this sorted out in my mind. And so I ended up at Maryland, and that's how Mark and I met at the University of Maryland. So that's sort of how it began.
I know, Mark, you went to a Yamaha music school, which is still around. I guess Connie, your mom, sent you there. Probably, I don't know, was it music probably wasn't even on your mind at that young an age, I guess, but or maybe it was, and she thought you'd like it.
Actually, it was. I guess how that started was for Christmas when I was 4, I got a little kind of toy xylophone, and with little mallets and things. And so I loved it, and I was playing it all the time. And pretty soon I was able to play pretty much all the tunes, and I knew in my head. And so they thought, oh, it's something that he really likes, so we'll enroll him in this Yamaha School of Music for tots. And so yeah, that's how I started my music studies.
And I mean, it seems to me, I was thinking of this. I mean, Olivia, it doesn't seem you were 100% clear you were going to be a full-time musician. It evolved that way. I think, Mark, you were pretty sure early on that's what you wanted to be. I mean, from like grade school.
Even earlier than that, I saw when I was 6, a friend of my dad's, who was in the San Francisco Symphony, was in the DC area playing a recital, and he wanted to practice his recital. So my dad invited him over to play a house concert at our house. And so I heard him play. And from the minute of that performance, I was hooked, and I thought, this is what I want to do. I've never wavered from that, although I will say that as a kid growing up, the idea of wanting to be a professional musician and the idea of actually practicing wasn't always congruent and inside of me. And I'd, like any kid, naturally I'd want to go out and play ball or something. And so of course I had to learn at a certain point that if that's really what I wanted, then I had to walk the walk as well.
I was just going to clarify, it's not that I didn't know I was going to be a musician, it's that I didn't know that there was never a point where I wasn't going to be one. That's what I meant. I was always going to be one. I just I don't have a clear picture of, like Mark did, of hearing something particular. Maybe it was that Pearlman concert that made me decide. It was just always part of my life, and I was always going to be a musician. Just there was no moment of decision.
Professional musician, make your living that way, or maybe, yes.
There was never anything else I was going to do. Maybe right.
Okay. No, okay. Well, I learned something. Yeah. Well, pretty neat to have two people that follow their dreams and are living it. And many people, incredibly competitive classical music. Many people would love to make their living. It's very difficult. Some people try to get into symphonies or want to be in symphonies. That's more back with structure. Maybe not, maybe a university is not a structure as a symphony, but you wouldn't have the same freedoms that you have now of teaching. I guess a lot of symphony, you had a teacher from the National Symphony when we were growing up, but so they definitely have studios, but they have a job working for that company or that symphony. It's probably company. And so you've even carved it out, in a unique way, which is also, if you were to start it over again, it'd be challenging, right?
Yeah, that's why you need to be young, have the energy of youth in order to start out all that kind of stuff.
That is really inspiring. I know that you do not have a website, but you do have a lot of performances on YouTube that people could watch. You also have information on your Facebook page, Marc Olivia, together, Marcolivia. We'll have the writing underneath the podcast, and that will tell where there's upcoming performances. What do you have? If there's any stories that y'all want to finish up on, or if you want to talk a little bit about what's coming up next? And then
I guess I would say one thing about getting our duo going, for those listeners who aren't classical music wonks, playing a duo is kind of an unusual category, because most performances fit into 2 categories. You're either a solo, okay, you might have a symphony or something like that, but you're a soloist or you're a chamber musician, which would be like a string quartet or something like that. So just a duo of violins or violin and viola is actually an unusual ensemble. And in fact, when we were trying to make all this work, we didn't qualify for a lot of chamber music. We consider ourselves kind of chamber music, half chamber musicians, half soloists, but we didn't really qualify in either category. And so there's a lot of things that we actually couldn't apply for and couldn't attend, couldn't do. So I guess one of the challenges for us was to, and Olivia, I think, became an expert at this, was to approach presenters and conductors and tell them that even though they didn't know a lot about violin duos, it was something that they really needed. And even though they never thought that they needed it.
Yes. Yeah, you don't really want Beethoven concerto. You actually want, Gustav Holst concerto for 2 violins, even though you've never heard it before. So do a lot of that. Yeah.
Well, I've got a story about Mark that Olivia, you may or may not heard. So he was always very coordinated, as you can imagine. I'm sure you must be too. I don't think, I mean, I couldn't be a musician, and I'm fairly coordinated, but not in those small finger thing. Well, in 7th grade, we had a typing class. It's very good because we learned how to type. We use it all the time. And Mark was very good at typing, as you might imagine, and so good that he entered a competition, and he realized he was going to end up in the state competition, and he might well win the state competition in typing. And as 7th grade boys trying to be young men and somewhat macho, he decided he didn't want to be the state champion in typing, that he might rather be a good soccer player, which he was. And so he suddenly dropped out of the typing competition. And so he doesn't have that on his repertoire.
I didn't know this.
Well, I didn't want to take it all the way, but I actually did win the school typing competition, truth be told. So that's my shameful story of the moment.
I did not know this story at all.
Well, really a lot of fun to have you on, and very interesting. I know people are going to enjoy hearing this, and we're going to do something unusual because we normally can't do this, but we're going to, after we say goodbye here, I'm going to have my helpful web consultant add on to this podcast with one of your performances that we have from YouTube or recorded. So for those of you who want to stay for a few more minutes, you'll get to hear Marc and Olivia playing. But as far as the conversation, for the moment, until we meet again, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank
This
you
was
for
fun.
having us. It was
Thanks.
great fun.